For almost 2 hours, he had been nothing more than an empty seat to everyone, as if he were invisible, just a shadow on the couch by the wall. Bank employees walked past without a glance. The security guard didn't greet him. The receptionist didn't even bother to lift her eyes. And then, at last, the glass doors of Silverhall Union Bank swung open. A rush of cold air spilled onto the street, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and lemon cleaner used to polish the gleaming handles and railings. Everything about that smell seemed to say, everything here runs by the rules. It's clean. It's wealthy. No surprises. He walked in with confidence. Raymond Holt, 55 years old. Stern gaze, purposeful stride. He wore a custom-made leather jacket. He didn't look around or ask where to go. He just walked straight ahead, calm, precise, as if he knew every inch of this place. You could feel the experience in him. For many years, he had worked at a major investment fund, handled matters with ministers, negotiated with mayors. He was the kind of man people turned to for results. He didn't try to impress. He simply was who he was. And that was enough. At 11 a.m., he had a meeting with the regional director, whom he had no reason to distrust, at least not yet. The lobby was carefully decorated in a style that combined corporate confidence with the wealth of several generations. Gray stone floors were paired with handmade rugs. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, ambiguous enough to look expensive, and gilded fixtures cast a warm, deliberately subdued light on custom-made walnut tables. It wasn't so much a waiting room as a statement that you weren't the richest person in the room, even if you thought you were. The receptionist sat behind a desk that looked like it had been brought in from a law firm. Her name tag read Brittany. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her voice sharp and dispassionate. "Welcome to Silverhall Union," she said without looking up. "Do you have an appointment?" "Raymond Holt," he replied, placing his briefcase on the marble counter, an antique Italian piece that had crossed more borders than most executives in their entire lives. "I have an appointment with Erica Lang at 11. She slowly typed something on the keyboard, her manicured nails tapping on the keys. "Found it," she said after a pause. "You'll be called in shortly." He nodded quietly and walked over to a row of chairs by the window, choosing one illuminated by natural light, with a cool but balanced steel frame. Sunlight pierced the lobby like a scalpel, illuminating the immaculate tiles with precise golden lines. At the other end of the room, two men in silk ties quietly discussed quarterly plans and acquisitions, their laughter soft and relaxed, the sound of people accustomed to always enjoying each other's company. 10 o'clock. He always arrived early. Always. He didn't build what he built by being late. 10:50. Everything was going according to plan. 11:05. Understood. 11:15. Still within the bounds of professional tardiness, though he was beginning to notice. At 11:20, a man in a blue suit, barely 30 years old, appeared. A few minutes later, a junior employee came out and led him through frosted glass partitions into the executive wing. Then a woman in a beige suit, about 45 years old, without an appointment or introduction, exchanged pleasantries with Brittany and was quickly invited in. Raymond's name? Not mentioned. They didn't even look at him. By 11:30, he wasn't just waiting, he was watching. Watching as some people entered and were easily recognized, as some laughed as they passed the security guards, as their presence elicited smiles and nods, as if some unspoken code had been introduced. And he sat there, still sitting, still unnoticed, his watch ticking, everything around him moving as if in a play he wasn't allowed to interrupt. His fingers resumed their quiet rhythm on the leather cover. Something was wrong. Not chaos. Just wrong, in that deliberate, subtle way that powerful institutions know how to make a person feel unnecessary, without saying it out loud. 40 minutes. That's how long Raymond Holt sat in the chair by the window. He had arrived early, as always. His appointment had been confirmed twice, his name was in the system, and he had every reason to expect a professional reception. But he was still waiting, while at least 6 other people, none of whom had been there when he arrived, passed through the frosted glass doors without delay, without even explaining why they were there. Raymond remained calm, not because he didn't notice, but because he had been through this before. A different lobby, a different building, a different face behind the desk, but the same game. The same quiet, subtle disrespect. The kind that no one ever writes about, for which there is always a ready excuse. "I'm sorry, sir," There must have been a mix-up with the schedule. Or, you know how crazy mornings can be. Polite words to hide something much more unpleasant. He slowly stood up, buttoned his coat with a steady hand, and returned to the reception desk. Brittany looked up at him, her face still wearing an expression of impeccable service that said nothing and meant even less. "I'm sorry," he said. "Miss Lang said I was here." She exhaled as if he had interrupted her in something very important. Without answering, she turned back to the screen and pressed a few keys without looking at him. Raymond waited. She didn't speak. She didn't even pretend to be looking for new information. He waited a few more seconds, then asked, "Do you know when she'll be available?" She shrugged sincerely. "I think soon." It was the way she said it. The even tone, without tension, without haste. She didn't even pretend to care. It was as if she were reading a script she didn't believe in. Raymond looked at her for another second, then turned toward the door. And then it happened again. The woman in the dark blue custom-made dress walked through the front door. She was carrying a designer bag, holding a phone to her ear, and smiling as if the room already belonged to her. She changed her gait slightly, and Brittany changed her posture, straightening her shoulders, softening her expression, and a voice that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago escaped her lips. "Good morning, Mrs. Langston." The woman nodded slightly, her eyes still on her phone. She didn't even look at Brittany. Less than 5 seconds later, a young banker in a freshly pressed suit appeared out of nowhere and escorted her through the frosted glass doors. No appointment. No waiting. No questions. Gone. Raymond sighed slowly, as if trying to swallow something sharp. He turned to Brittany. "So, appointments are important here?" he asked quietly. "Or do you let people in based on how expensive their bag looks?" She froze for a second. Just a second. Then she came to her senses. "As I said, sir, she'll be here shortly." There it was again. Shortly. No time, no commitment. Just a word people use when they don't want to say what they really mean. He returned to his chair. Sat down. His hands fell to his knees. This wasn't just a delay. This wasn't someone who was running late. He had built a company from the ground up. He walked into rooms where no one expected him to speak, and walked out with a signed contract. He knew how to be patient. He knew how to read a room. He knew when a door was jammed and when it had been locked on purpose. He looked at his watch again. 12:05. More than an hour had passed since the scheduled meeting. The lobby was empty. Everyone had left. No one else was waiting. No one else had been let in. Except him. At the far end of the room, he heard a quiet conversation. An elderly man, probably in his 70s, dressed in golf clothes, was standing at the cash register, chatting casually with a young employee. "She doesn't even need an appointment," the old man said with a smile. "I told her to just come in. They'll take care of her." The cashier laughed. "Of course. We always make exceptions for Mrs. Langston." Raymond sat motionless, staring ahead, his hand slowly clenching the handle of his leather briefcase, not out of fear or even anger, but rather from the feeling that comes when you realize you've seen this before. You know how things are with black people. And you know for sure that these rules aren't written for everyone. White, rich people are welcomed with open arms, while others are asked to wait because someone at this bank decided that your presence isn't as important as someone else's. Opinion that your position means almost nothing compared to the price of someone's dress or their last name. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and continued to stare at the shiny, immaculately polished floor, as if he could read the answers there, as if the reflection of something so perfect and pure hid the real truth, not about the bank, not about money, but about how quickly people divide others into those who matter and those who could be ignored. And it wasn't because of a scheduling mistake, or because they were overworked, or because they were busy. It was a decision, cold, quiet, clear. It was a signal. You're not one of those we invite right away. You're one of those who has to wait until we decide we need you. And now the choice was his, to stay and wait silently until someone remembered him and gave him permission to enter, or to show, without shouting, without rushing, but making it clear that his time was as valuable as everyone else's, that he would not sit and wait until someone deemed it necessary, because his presence was not a request or a gift, it was a fact. He stood up. Not abruptly, not defiantly. He just stood up the way a person stands up when they are tired of playing someone else's game. He walked straight to the counter. Without rushing, without looking back. Brittany looked up and immediately stood up, as if she felt control slipping away from her, and everything she was used to holding in her hands was now crumbling. "Sir, you can't just," she began, but he had already passed her. He didn't answer. He didn't stop. He opened the glass door, the very one through which he had been watching people pass all day, and found himself on the other side. It was quieter there. The light was soft, a little cooler than in the reception area. The corridor was clean, almost sterile. Several doors were closed. Several were ajar. He walked slowly, confidently, like a man who doesn't ask permission. Like a man who isn't a guest here. Like a man who is used to entering rooms like this not by invitation, but by right. And there she was, Erica Lang. She was sitting at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't in a meeting. She was just working. Just sitting there. She looked up. For a second, her eyes widened, the reaction of someone caught off guard, pulled out of their comfort zone. Then her expression changed. The surprise disappeared. It was replaced by irritation. Real. Deep. Sharp. "Mr. Holt," she said sharply, her voice hard, as if she hoped to maintain control through her tone. "You should have waited for an invitation." He stopped in front of her desk. Calm. Direct. He looked at her without blinking. "I waited," he replied. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked at him as if trying to understand how this had happened, how he had ended up here, why her familiar order of things had been disrupted. The room fell silent, thick and sticky. "Sit down," she finally said, but without confidence, her voice sounding different, not like an order, but like a suggestion, almost a request. He sat down, not because she allowed him to, but because he decided it was his turn now. And when he leaned back in his chair, adjusting his jacket, one thing became clear. Whatever she had planned for this meeting, her plans had changed. Linda shifted slightly in her chair, almost imperceptibly, just adjusting the stack of papers in front of her, but Raymond noticed it, the tension in her jaw, the flash of irritation in her eyes that she tried to hide behind a forced smile. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said in a light, too light voice, the kind people use when they hope you'll just forget about it. Today was one of those days, nonstop, one thing after another. We were swamped. Raymond sat motionless, his eyes calm, but his words were heavy. "Were you busy?" he asked, not harshly, but not softly either. "Because I sat there for an hour and a half, and I saw how many people came in and left right away." The tight smile on Linda's face disappeared, and she looked uncomfortable for the first time. She straightened the folder in front of her again, as if the papers could give her something to do with her hands. "I'm sure it wasn't on purpose," she said, trying to find the right tone. "Probably just a scheduling problem. Just a misunderstanding." Raymond didn't respond right away. He took a slow, steady breath through his nose. He'd heard that phrase too many times. A misunderstanding. A word people use when they want to make excuses but don't want to take responsibility. Linda clearly wanted to move on to another question. She cleared her throat and opened the folder. "So, let's take a look at your application," she said, her tone now colder. "I've looked at the figures. You have solid assets and a good reputation, but we are tightening our lending criteria, so unless you can provide additional collateral, we will have to put your application on hold." She had barely uttered the last word when the atmosphere in the room changed. The door behind him opened. He heard voices, low, steady, strong. 3 people entered, and he immediately sensed a change. It wasn't just their suits or their manners, but something else. These were decision-makers. These weren't people who waited in lobbies. At the head of the group stood a man Raymond recognized immediately, Derek Kane, CEO of Summit Grove Financial, a man he had known for 25 years. Kane looked around the room, stopped at Raymond, and his expression changed. "Raymond Holt," he said, raising his eyebrows and smiling broadly. "What are you doing here?" Linda froze. She held her breath for a second. Raymond slowly stood up and shook Derek's hand. "Hi, Derek," he said. "Long time no see." Kane slapped him on the back. "Still working for the Holt Group? Still growing like a weed?" Raymond smiled slightly. "Still building and investing." Linda watched them, clutching the folder as if it could protect her. Kane turned to her, still smiling, but now there was a shadow in his smile. "How long has Ray been waiting?" She opened her mouth but said nothing. Raymond froze for a second. He let the silence hang in the air. "About an hour and a half," he finally said. Kane didn't flinch or raise his voice, but Raymond noticed his jaw twitch. That little sigh said, "Someone's gonna have a bad day." "An hour and a half," Kane repeated, as if he couldn't believe it. "You made Raymond Holt wait an hour and a half?" Linda faltered. There was a scheduling problem. I wasn't told." Kane didn't even look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Raymond. "You should have called me," he said. "I would have taken care of it myself." Raymond shook his head slightly. "I didn't think it was necessary." Kane turned to Linda, and the smile disappeared from his face. "Go," he said quietly but sharply. She nodded too quickly. "Of course," she muttered, grabbing her things and leaving, standing up straight and tense. Her face was pale. Her hands clenched into fists, then relaxed. When the door closed behind her, Kane turned and exhaled. "I don't know what that was," he said, "but I promise it won't happen again." Raymond didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done. Kane sat down opposite him, leaning back slightly in his chair, his hands folded. The other two executives remained standing, silent, alert, watching. "We don't treat people like that here," Kane said in a calm but firm voice. "Judging by what I saw in the lobby, that's not the case," Raymond replied. Kane didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. People like him don't waste time on excuses. They assess, calculate, and act. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Raymond told him everything. From the moment he walked in. The wait. The people who came after him and were served first. Brittany's tone. Linda's indifference. Her attempts to interrupt the conversation and end the meeting as quickly as possible, as if he were a nuisance. Kane listened. So did the other two. No interruptions. Just silence. When Raymond finished, Kane rubbed his chin. "I appreciate you telling me about this," he said. "And, to be honest, I'm furious." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Kane laughed briefly, without humor. "Because things like this destroy everything. The brand, the trust, the relationships we've built over the years. You think we got this far by making people like you sit in the hallways while we kiss the rings of those who come in with a name that looks good on a check." He looked at one of the other executives. "Make sure Linda isn't working this afternoon. I'll talk to her later." The man nodded and left without saying a word. Kane turned to Raymond. "Your application was in order, right?" Raymond tapped the briefcase standing next to him. "Everything's in there." Kane took the briefcase, opened the folder, and flipped through the first few pages. He didn't need to read much. "Everything's fine," he said. "More than fine." Then he turned to the other executive who was still in the room. "Put this on top of the stack. I want it on my desk, signed today." Raymond watched him closely. This wasn't generosity. It was cleanup. Damage control. He knew exactly what Kane was doing, closing the lid before the story got out and caused serious problems. Raymond stood up. "I'll approve it," he said. "But it won't solve the problem." Kane looked him in the eye. "We'll talk soon." Raymond nodded. He picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. As he passed the reception desk, Brittany looked up, and this time she wasn't smiling. The sun was shining outside. The marble walls of Summit Grove gleamed in the heat, but Raymond knew what lay behind them, an organization that had just been caught red-handed. It wasn't about the loan. It wasn't even about Linda. It was about how easy it was to get fired, how quietly it could happen, how some were accepted without question, while others were made to wait. And today, someone was going to pay for it. He took out his phone. New message. Loan approved. He smiled, put his phone in his pocket, and walked to his car. Respect isn't asked for. It's earned. And today, he earned it. If you've ever been made to feel that your time doesn't matter, that your presence is unwanted, don't wait for permission. Take your place. Speak up. And if they make you wait, make sure they remember why it was a mistake. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance? Share your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about justice, click the like button and subscribe to read more inspiring stories that remind us of what really matters in life. And tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know.